and welcome. Ryan here from Fiscal, and today I'm going to be doing a deep dive into our general settings and looking at the important settings and the downstream effects thereof. So the first thing to note is our legal trading name. That is going to be present on all of our documents and templates. The base currency, this we can change up until we have a transaction in Cin7 Core. As soon as we have a transaction like a purchase order or a sales order, it will not allow us to adjust this going forward. Send emails from. So when we're looking at a document and we'd like to email it out to whoever, this setting will dictate how it is sent. So are we going to use the billing contact? So the Cin7 Core's default billing contact, or are we going to use the currently logged in user? So if I have an accounts manager or an ops manager. So if I have the billing contact is accounts@fiscal.com, then it'll and I select this, it'll always send from that account. However, if the default is set to accounts@fiscal, but I'm logged in as operations@fiscal, then it will be sent from the operations account. Now, the sent from system is going to help the recipient receive it in their inbox. If we do not select send from system, oftentimes your recipient's email host will reject the email as spam potentially, or go as far as phishing, because it is being sent from a domain that is not the same as the sender's profile. So something to consider, we usually recommend send from the system, logged in user. Open details in new tab and same tab. This is an operational benefit. So we prefer using new tab rather than same tab. It just allows us to open multiple sales orders at a time. However, if we're running relatively low volumes or we're not working on too many things all at once, then same tab is perfectly fine. When we're looking at our CSV file encoding, we recommend ASC2. It's just a little bit more compatible with the Google Sheet export. Of course, we can always change the encoding type with whichever software we're using, but for simple use, with this ASC2 seems to work the best for us. And we usually use the Google Sheets to make any adjustments to our data, to update or to export and then to import into Cin7 Core. Cool. Tax calculation method. Now this will depend on the accounting software. Xero works on row total and QBO works on document total. So depending on the accounting software that you're using, you will be using either one of those two. It just tells us, or tells Cin7 how it should be calculating its tax, right? If it's the document total, of course, we're going to add up all of our items in that document and then calculate tax. However, on row total, it'll calculate tax per line item. Now, if it's configured incorrectly, so let's say I am using document total for Xero when I should be using row total, we will be getting a rounding error on our Xero integration. Right, next up we have some security settings. We recommend every 3 to 6 months password change frequency and a session timeout of every 30 to 60 minutes. However, if you're not concerned with security within your office or the people that are going to be using Cin7, then it's fine to extend that out. Or if you have multiple people using Cin7, you work in a busy environment, then maybe recommending a shorter session timeout and potentially a shorter change frequency. Okay. Looking at our financial settings, a lot of these settings will need to be consistent with our accounting software and of course our legal data. So our financial year end will be the year end of the entity. Our tax period will of course be calculated on the certain tax period that we are liable for. tax ID number, tax display name. These are optional fields. We look at our period lock date. So the period lock date will often be overridden by our accounting software as soon as we integrate with either QBO or Xero, and we update the period lock date in the accounting system. It'll push it back into Cin7 and tell the operators within Cin7 that we're not allowed to adjust any transaction or task that happened before that period. Going into our product measurements and settings, SKU auto generation, oftentimes we recommend this to be turned off as we'd like our SKUs to conform to a particular SKU schema that we can read very easily. So this will depend on how your SKU is set up, but it is advisable that your SKUs have some sort of structure that highlights variations of certain products, and just something easy for us to read when we're working with the SKUs. Updating the stock receipt date with a transfer completion date. This one, it depends on what you're using Cin7 Core for. If we're using it for warehouse and we're trying to get rid of inventory that we received a while ago, irrespective of the movements within our Cin7 Core account, then we will want to turn that off. However, if we have some older stock that is transferred as a new stock item to a storefront, for example, then turning that on would update the receive dates in that store, and the FIFO would then push the item that was received in that location prior to that one. Right, recommend batch serial number for FIFO or FIFO. So if it is on do not recommend, when we're at the pick stage of our sales order, it's not going to suggest a batch or serial number. However, if we select recommend and warn, it will recommend a batch that is the oldest or that was received longer in the past, and it will warn if this is not selected. However, it will not enforce it, and that's the next step. Is if it is different, we can choose to enforce that we choose a particular product with a particular batch or serial number if we select recommend and force. Right. Moving over to purchase process customization. This depends on your workflow, invoice first or stock first. So typically, do we receive the invoice from our supplier first, or do we receive our stock from the supplier first? This depends entirely on you. It also will change the orientation in our purchase order. So if we have stock first, it's going to have the receiving icon and step before our invoice item, and our invoice process, and vice versa. Looking at our purchase order, we'll use, so this is a product level setting. It's either going to be our latest supplier price. So if I've bought from this supplier in the past, it will then, and I've received an invoice for the product from that supplier on the next purchase, which will be this purchase order, it'll use that price from before. However, if I have a product level setting and I have a supplier price fixed on that product, it'll automatically update to the product level setting over there. So the purchase documents, this is just a preference sorted by order entered, by SKU, or by product name. This is also adjustable. This is just the default setting from now. Looking at our minimum before reorder set, this impacts our material resource planning module, or the MRP module, but oftentimes we would suggest each location in any event. Then we look at our default attribute set. So if we have any attributes that are particular for products, for purchases, then we will need to specify which attribute set is going to be used for the purchase order processing. When we're looking at use put away, this is for the usually for the WMS. However, it also functions in the purchase order on Cin7 Core as well. It adds an additional step during our receiving of that purchase order, where we can receive it, and then the next step is to put it away, and then the next step is the invoice, for example. So it adds another section of our stock receiving. Enabling accrued inventory transactions. Now, this one is quite important. This basically dictates if we have a goods received, not invoiced, and then a goods invoiced, not received. This account is actually mapped incorrectly. But yes, so a goods received, not invoiced means that we have received, the stock receiving has occurred, and we are still waiting for an invoice from our supplier. What this does is it allows us to value our inventory at our purchase order price, and then once it updates to our, and then once we receive our invoice, it then updates to that invoice price as opposed to the purchase order price. And then vice versa, if I have received an invoice but not the products received, it adds the level of detail that I can then say, okay, I need to follow up with this supplier because I have received an invoice and potentially paid for it, but I'm still waiting for the inventory. So these two accounts are highly recommended from us. Enabling archiving, personal preference, enabling order approval. If we select this, it just adds another step to our purchase order process, where one user will have the creation of a purchase order, and then another user, potentially a manager, will have to approve it before it can be sent to, or before it can be authorized rather. Right, moving on to the sales process customization. Right, so assigning an invoice number on sale creation or on invoice authorization. This is also a personal preference. You just it basically says that if I have if I select on invoice authorization and I have a sales order that is authorized, but I haven't fulfilled it and I have not created the invoice for it, then it will not have the invoice number. However, if it is on sales creation, there will be a number attached for the invoice before I even create or authorize the invoice. Then the next important item is available quantity is limited to selected locations only. Now, this one is dependent on your workflow. If we have an e-commerce integration, typically it will be selected locations only. If we're managing multiple locations, of course, then selected locations only. But if we only have one location, all locations is perfectly fine. But as soon as we do add a little bit more detail and offer more locations, then it is recommended that the available quantity is then limited to a specific location. If this is set to all locations, then it will say, okay, cool, I have 5 units available in location A, and I have 2 units available in location B. So effectively, I can sell 7 units. And oftentimes this creates real world complications. And so we do recommend using specific locations only, and then doing stock transfers when and as needed. Then looking at our set invoice date, default invoice date, and default shipment date. When we're looking at these settings, this will determine when your revenue is recognized. Is it recognized at invoice authorization, order authorization, or shipment authorization? So it depends on your workflow, but this will determine when our revenue is recognized. Then if we go to a default invoice date, So this is oftentimes when we're processing an invoice, and it auto populates on the invoice date, what it is. Is it for today's date? Is it for our sales order date or the sales shipment date? And then the default shipment date, either invoice date or current date. So it depends on your particular workflow, but oftentimes it'll be set if we're using Cin7 as an active inventory management software, where we're using it from inside it as a day-to-day basis rather than using it from our e-commerce platforms, which integrate sales. But if we're actually managing our sales in Cin7, then current date is usually the way forward. Then if we are looking at picking, packing, and shipping as automatic or manual, again, this depends on your current warehouse setup. However, to start with, we recommend manual for all of these. And then if we're looking at discount rule, it either updates the sales price or the discount price. And this is on the line items when we're looking at our discounts on the sales order. And then again, doing the default attribute set. So this is a sales attribute set specific to our sales. And this will be set up obviously in our reference books, just like the purchase order default attribute set as well. Then looking further on, production order is unfortunately not in scope of this video. This is relating to advanced manufacturing and not necessarily something we're considering for now. Then we're looking at our sales price tiers. This is obviously if we have a retail price, a wholesale price, maybe a 10% discount price, and we don't want to use the discount workflow, then this is where we would set it up. Of course, if we have retail 1, retail 2, maybe wholesale 1, wholesale 2, we would also add it here. We have also seen, however, that some clients are using the price tier as a estimated or a target cost price, for example, that we're using internally to track and not actually posting this anywhere for sale. And then we have our document numbers. We can change our prefixes and the next numbers. Then further on, multilingual support is not necessarily too important. Gift card settings, we can enable gift cards. Just remember that Cin7 only supports one gift card at a time. Then at Tooltips, we like to set all of these as on. It gives us more flexibility in our workflow. The tooltips are the highlighted items that pop up when we're looking at inventory or sales and so on. Gives us a little bit more details. And that is everything in our general settings.